NASA has launched some of the most ambitious missions in human history, but not all of them have gone according to plan. NASA's biggest failures weren't just technical glitches, they were global disasters, billion-dollar losses, and tragic wake-up calls. So, without wasting time, let's break down NASA's 20 most shocking mission failures and rocket malfunctions. This was supposed to be a celebration, a $264 million mission to bring back pieces of the sun itself. Genesis launched in 2001, orbiting for over 2 years while collecting solar wind particles, tiny bits of cosmic dust that could help scientists understand how our solar system formed. It was hyped as one of NASA's most important sample return missions. And then it crashed. On September 8, 2004, Genesis re-entered Earth's atmosphere and was supposed to deploy a parachute to make a soft landing in the Utah desert. But that parachute never opened. Instead, the capsule came in hot, slamming into the ground at nearly 200 miles per hour and cracking open like an egg. When investigators dug through the wreckage, they found the reason. A pair of G-force sensors had been installed backwards. That tiny design flaw prevented the parachute system from knowing when to trigger. Years of work, millions of dollars, all because someone didn't double-check the orientation of a sensor. While some of the samples were salvaged, the mission was largely considered a disaster and a painful lesson in how the smallest mistake can bring down the biggest plans. And unfortunately for NASA, this wouldn't be the only time a re-entry mission ended in flames. By 2009, climate change had become a global priority, and NASA was ready to make a major contribution with the Orbiting Carbon Observatory, or OCO. This satellite was built to track carbon dioxide emissions from space, giving scientists a real-time view of how greenhouse gases moved around the planet. It was a high-stakes mission, and it didn't even make it past the launch pad. The rocket took off from California's Vandenberg Air Force Base in the early morning hours. Everything looked fine until the payload fairing refused to separate. That fairing, basically the nose cone protecting the satellite during launch, was supposed to detach as soon as the rocket left the atmosphere. But it stayed stuck. The rocket, now too heavy, lost velocity and plunged into the ocean near Antarctica. The mission was a total loss. $278 million gone in under 3 minutes. Later investigations revealed the separation system had been built by a contractor whose hardware hadn't been properly tested under real flight conditions. That little oversight destroyed years of work and delayed vital climate research. What's worse is that just 2 years later, NASA tried again, with almost the exact same design. You'd think NASA would have learned its lesson after the Orbiting Carbon Observatory disaster. But in 2011, history repeated itself in the most embarrassing way possible. This time, the satellite was called Glory, another climate monitoring mission meant to study Earth's atmosphere and track tiny particles called aerosols that impact global warming. Same purpose, same launch site, same contractor. And you guessed it, same exact failure. Just like with OCO, the payload fairing on Glory's rocket never separated. With all that extra weight still attached, the rocket couldn't reach orbit and spiraled into the ocean near Antarctica. The launch had cost NASA another $424 million. At that point, critics started questioning why NASA had trusted the same unproven system again. It wasn't just an accident. It looked like negligence. The failed mission sparked congressional hearings, public outrage, and deep internal investigations into NASA's procurement and testing processes. Before Neil Armstrong ever set foot on the moon, NASA faced one of its darkest moments. On January 27, 1967, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were strapped into the Apollo 1 capsule for a routine pre-launch test. It was supposed to be just that. A test. No fuel in the rocket, no liftoff, just systems checks. But what happened next was catastrophic. A spark ignited inside the command module, which was filled with pure oxygen at high pressure, a recipe for disaster. Within seconds, the capsule became an inferno. The crew tried desperately to open the hatch, but it was sealed and complicated to unlock under pressure. In just over 17 seconds, all 3 astronauts were dead. The nation was horrified. The media, Congress, and even NASA employees demanded answers. Investigations revealed a laundry list of issues: flammable materials, poor wiring, a flawed hatch design, and rushed development. The Apollo 1 fire grounded the entire program. It delayed the moon landing for years and led to a total overhaul of NASA's safety protocols. But it also became a grim reminder that spaceflight wasn't just exciting, it was deadly serious. Astronauts, we've had a problem here. Those words would become legendary, but they also marked one of NASA's most nail-biting missions of all time. Apollo 13 launched on April 11, 1970, on what was supposed to be the 3rd moon landing. Everything was smooth until 2 days into the mission, when an oxygen tank in the service module exploded. The blast knocked out the spacecraft's main power and oxygen supply, and suddenly, 3 astronauts were stranded 200,000 miles from Earth in a damaged ship. What followed was a life-or-death scramble. Mission Control worked around the clock to jury-rig solutions, using the lunar module as a lifeboat, conserving power, filtering out carbon dioxide with makeshift parts. This was space survival at its finest. Miraculously, the crew made it back alive. But the investigation revealed the tank that exploded had been damaged years earlier and wasn't properly replaced or inspected. The root cause? A cascade of overlooked warnings and rushed decisions. Apollo 13 was technically a failure, but in NASA's eyes, it was also a miracle. Still, the line between survival and catastrophe was way too thin for comfort. And that's exactly what made the next Apollo mission even more unnerving. Most people remember Apollo 11 for putting the first man on the moon. But Apollo 12? That mission almost ended before it began, and in the most bizarre way possible. Just 36 seconds after liftoff on November 14, 1969, the Saturn V rocket was struck by lightning. Twice. The electrical surge knocked out the spacecraft's guidance system and telemetry, leaving Mission Control completely blind. For a moment, it looked like they'd have to abort the mission and trigger an emergency return. But one engineer, John Aaron, remembered a little-known setting called SCE to AUX. He suggested the crew flip that switch. Astronaut Alan Bean did exactly that, and just like that, systems came back online. Apollo 12 continued on and landed on the moon, but it was almost over before it started, all because of a lightning bolt no one had planned for. Afterward, NASA updated its weather guidelines for launches, making sure future missions didn't fly through storm clouds again, because as they quickly realized, even a perfect rocket can be taken down by a very Earth-bound problem. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to ride a jackhammer into space, ask the engineers behind Apollo 6. This was NASA's final uncrewed test of the Saturn V rocket before launching astronauts. The goal was simple: prove the rocket could handle a full mission profile. But what they got instead was one of the roughest rides in spaceflight history. Just minutes after liftoff on April 4th, 1968, the rocket began to violently shake, an effect known as pogo oscillation. It got so bad, the entire rocket flexed back and forth like a spring-loaded toy. The forces were so intense that pieces of the spacecraft started falling off, including fairings and insulation. Then things got worse. 2 of the 5 second-stage engines shut down prematurely. The third stage never fired properly. And instead of simulating a moon mission, Apollo 6 barely limped into a low Earth orbit before NASA called it a day. The pogo effect turned out to be a massive engineering problem that nearly derailed the entire Apollo program. NASA had to scramble to redesign parts of the Saturn V to prevent it from happening again, because if it had struck with a crew on board, it would have been a death sentence. Apollo 14 was under a lot of pressure. It was the first mission after Apollo 13's near disaster, and NASA needed a win. But even before the crew reached the moon, things started going sideways. As the command module approached the lunar module for docking, the latches failed to lock. Over and over, the astronauts tried to make the connection. Nothing worked. If they couldn't dock, they couldn't land, and the mission would be a bust. After several tense minutes and 6 failed attempts, astronaut Stuart Roosa finally tried something different. He fired the thrusters just enough to give the spacecraft a firm jolt, and on that 7th try, the modules locked. But that wasn't the only problem. Once on the moon, Commander Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell ran into issues with their navigation systems. At one point, they nearly lost track of their location and almost missed their science objectives entirely. It took old-school instincts, backup calculations, and a lot of improvising to keep the mission on track. Apollo 14 did land and return safely, but it was clear NASA wasn't out of the danger zone just yet, as that danger was about to follow them all the way into Earth orbit with a shuttle that broke records and almost broke apart. STS-93 was supposed to be a historic mission. It marked the first time a woman commander, Eileen Collins, was at the helm of a U.S. spaceflight. But almost immediately after launch, things started to go horribly wrong. Just 5 seconds after liftoff, a short circuit triggered 2 separate malfunctions. One of Columbia's main engines lost thrust, and a hydrogen leak caused temperatures to spike. Alarms blared in the cockpit. For a few terrifying seconds, it looked like the shuttle might not even reach orbit. Engineers on the ground were watching in disbelief. One more failure, and they'd be planning a funeral instead of a science mission. But Columbia somehow powered through. Against the odds, the shuttle reached space and successfully deployed the Chandra X-ray Observatory, a $1.5 billion telescope designed to explore black holes. The crew returned safely, but NASA didn't breathe easy for long. Post-flight inspections revealed just how close they'd come to catastrophe. The electrical fault had originated from a single wire. Insulation had worn down due to vibrations. That wire could have sparked an explosion mid-flight. STS-93 proved that even when a mission looks like a win on paper, it can still be a brush with death. This is the only time in NASA history where a space shuttle experienced an abort to orbit, which is code for this isn't going according to plan, but we're going to make it work anyway. STS-51F launched on July 29, 1985, with the Shuttle Challenger. Everything was going smoothly until about 3 minutes into the flight. That's when one of the 3 main engines suddenly shut down. Automatically, the shuttle's computers kicked into overdrive and triggered an emergency sequence, rerouting power and recalculating its trajectory on the fly. With only 2 engines firing, Challenger couldn't reach its planned orbit, but the crew and mission control pulled off a miracle. They adjusted the flight path and managed to get the shuttle into a lower orbit, enough to complete most of their science experiments. But once the shuttle landed, NASA engineers were horrified by what they found. The engine failure had been caused by a blocked coolant line. If the blockage had lasted a few seconds longer, the engine could have exploded mid-flight, possibly taking the whole shuttle with it. This was a technical win, sure, but under the surface, it was another bullet dodged. And sadly, the same shuttle, Challenger, wouldn't be so lucky just a few months later. This is the failure that stunned the world. On January 28, 1986, millions of people, students, teachers, families, tuned in to watch the Space Shuttle Challenger launch. One of the crew members was Krista McAuliffe, a school teacher set to become the first civilian in space. It was supposed to be an inspiring moment for NASA and the entire country. Instead, 73 seconds after liftoff, Challenger exploded in midair. All 7 astronauts on board were killed. The cause was shockingly simple. An O-ring in the right solid rocket booster failed due to the cold weather that morning. Engineers from contractor Morton Thiokol had warned NASA not to launch. They were overruled. When the booster joint failed, a jet of flame shot through the side of the fuel tank, igniting the massive external fuel reservoir. The shuttle disintegrated in the sky, leaving a trail of white smoke that would haunt NASA for decades. The nation went into mourning. A presidential commission, led by Richard Feynman, uncovered deep problems in NASA's culture, namely ignoring warnings and pushing forward under pressure. Challenger became a permanent scar on NASA's history. But the worst part is that the exact same shuttle design continued flying for years. And it would take another tragedy, one even more chilling, to finally ground the fleet. 17 years after Challenger, tragedy struck again. On February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia was returning home after a successful 16-day mission in orbit. But as it entered Earth's atmosphere, the spacecraft broke apart. All 7 astronauts were killed instantly. The investigation revealed a horrifying truth. The damage had occurred before the mission even began. During launch, a chunk of foam insulation broke off from the external tank and struck the shuttle's left wing. That impact punched a hole in the heat shield. And when Columbia re-entered the atmosphere at over 17,000 miles per hour, superheated plasma tore through the wing and caused the spacecraft to disintegrate. What's worse is that engineers suspected the damage had occurred during liftoff, but NASA management dismissed requests to get better imagery of the wing while Columbia was still in orbit. They assumed the foam couldn't do serious damage. They were wrong. This second major disaster forced NASA to halt all shuttle flights for over 2 years. It also led to the eventual retirement of the entire shuttle program. When NASA built the Mars Climate Orbiter, the goal was simple: study the Martian atmosphere and serve as a relay station for future missions. It was part of NASA's push to dominate Mars exploration in the late 90s. But instead of orbiting the red planet, the $327 million spacecraft vanished into thin air. And the reason is a unit conversion error. One team used metric units, another used imperial. So when it came time for the spacecraft to adjust its trajectory and enter Mars orbit, the system applied way too much thrust. The probe came in too low, dipped into the Martian atmosphere, and was either destroyed or sent hurtling off into deep space. Just like that, years of planning and research were gone, all because 2 groups didn't agree on whether to use pounds or newtons. Just months after losing the Climate Orbiter, NASA was hoping for redemption with the Mars Polar Lander. Launched in January 1999, this spacecraft was meant to touch down near Mars's South Pole and search for signs of water beneath the frozen soil. Expectations were high. But on December 3rd, 1999, right as it was descending to the surface, NASA lost contact. No explosion, no distress signal, nothing. 1 second, it was there. The next, gone. After weeks of silence, investigators reached a brutal conclusion. During descent, the lander's legs may have deployed a few seconds too early. That sudden jolt tricked the onboard computer into thinking it had already landed. So it shut off the descent engines while the spacecraft was still over 100 feet in the air. It crash-landed straight into the Martian surface. NASA had spent over $165 million on this mission, and the failure left the agency reeling. Even worse is that the Polar Lander was part of a faster, better, cheaper initiative meant to prove NASA could do more with less. After the retirement of the Space Shuttle program, NASA needed a new ride to the International Space Station. That led to the Commercial Crew Program and Boeing's shiny new spacecraft, the CST-100 Starliner. But the first major test flight, a total embarrassment. In December 2019, Boeing launched the Orbital Flight Test 1, an uncrewed mission meant to prove Starliner could safely reach the ISS. But just 31 minutes into the mission, everything went sideways. The onboard clock was wrong. Seriously, off by 11 hours. That small timing error caused the spacecraft to fire its thrusters at the wrong time, using up too much fuel. By the time engineers realized what had happened, it was too late. Starliner couldn't reach the right orbit, and it never made it to the ISS. NASA and Boeing had to abort the mission and bring the capsule back to Earth early. It landed safely, but the damage was already done. The OFT-1 failure exposed serious problems in Boeing's software testing and safety procedures. Multiple redundant systems failed to catch the error before launch. And in a moment of pure irony, the spacecraft built to replace the shuttle ended up highlighting why NASA had trust issues with contractors. STS-124 was supposed to be a routine construction flight to the International Space Station. The shuttle Discovery launched on May 31, 2008, delivering a massive Japanese science module. But what happened on the return trip nearly became a fatal nightmare, and no one saw it coming. During a spacewalk, astronaut Garrett Reisman was outside the station, performing maintenance with another crew member. All was calm until a piece of rocket debris shot past them at blistering speed. We're talking faster than a bullet, moving at orbital velocity. Had it been just a few feet closer, it could have torn through Reisman's suit. Or worse. Turns out, a piece of metal insulation had detached during the shuttle's liftoff and was now part of the ever-growing cloud of space junk orbiting Earth. NASA tracked it, but the timing couldn't have been worse. The close call forced a temporary halt to the spacewalk and a re-evaluation of how much debris was actually circling our planet. It also reignited debates over whether the shuttle program's launch procedures were creating more hazards than they were solving. This wasn't a malfunction, it was a ticking time bomb in Earth's orbit, and one slip away from being a funeral. The James Webb Space Telescope was NASA's most ambitious space observatory ever. With a $10 billion price tag, it was meant to be the successor to Hubble, capable of looking further into the universe than anything before it. But before it even launched, the mission was teetering on the edge of catastrophe. Over its 2-decade development, the telescope was plagued by cost overruns, design flaws, and political backlash. But the real scare came just weeks before launch. During final preparations in late 2021, a clamp holding the telescope suddenly released, sending vibrations through the entire observatory. Everyone thought the mission was doomed. Engineers scrambled to run emergency tests. If even one of Webb's ultra-fragile components had been damaged, it could have meant years of delays or a total loss. Miraculously, it survived. And when it launched on Christmas Day 2021, every single deployment, over 300 of them, worked perfectly. But the near miss reminded everyone that even the most advanced tech can come crashing down from the simplest mistake. But if that didn't shake NASA enough, the next mission would push a probe so far into deep space, they never even found the wreckage. Technically, this was a European Space Agency mission, but NASA was deeply involved in coordinating data relays and orbit support. And what happened to Beagle 2? It's still one of the most mysterious space failures of all time. Launched aboard the Mars Express mission in 2003, Beagle 2 was designed to search for life on Mars. It was a small, disc-shaped lander packed with tools, drills, and even a robotic arm. On Christmas Day, it was supposed to land gently on the Martian surface. But after release, radio silence. NASA never received a signal. The European Space Agency never got confirmation of a successful landing. For over a decade, no one knew if Beagle 2 had burned up, crashed, or vanished. Then in 2015, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter spotted something on the surface. Beagle 2 had landed. The descent worked, but not all of its solar panels had deployed, blocking its antenna and preventing it from calling home. It was a flawless landing, ruined by one bad hinge. We've touched on it earlier, but it deserves its own place at the top of this list, because no story captures the fragility of space travel quite like the loss of Columbia. On February 1st, 2003, after a successful 16-day science mission, the Columbia shuttle was re-entering Earth's atmosphere. Everything looked normal. The crew was chatting, preparing for landing, completely unaware that their ship was falling apart. Just 82 seconds after launch, 2 weeks earlier, a chunk of foam insulation had broken off the external fuel tank and slammed into the shuttle's left wing. It punched a hole into the thermal shielding tiles, but NASA never fully investigated the extent of the damage. Management believed it wasn't serious. They were wrong. During re-entry, superheated gases entered the hole and tore through the wing structure. The shuttle disintegrated at 12,000 miles per hour, scattering debris across Texas and Louisiana. All 7 astronauts died. It was one of the most preventable tragedies in NASA history. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of astronomy. After decades of planning and $1.5 billion in development, the Hubble Space Telescope launched aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery in April 1990. It was NASA's most advanced space observatory, designed to deliver crystal-clear images of galaxies billions of light-years away. But when the first photos came in, scientists were stunned for all the wrong reasons. The images were blurry, completely out of focus. After countless missions, tests, and calibration procedures, NASA had launched the most advanced telescope in history with a broken mirror. The culprit is a microscopic manufacturing error. One edge of the 8-foot-wide primary mirror had been ground just 2.2 microns too flat. That's less than the width of a human hair. But in the world of precision optics, it was catastrophic. NASA was humiliated. The public mocked the failure. Congress demanded answers. Headlines dubbed Hubble the $1.5 billion blunder. It looked like NASA had spent a decade putting glasses on a blind man, and the whole world was watching. But to their credit, NASA didn't give up. In 1993, astronauts aboard the Endeavour conducted one of the most complex space repair missions ever, installing corrective lenses, essentially giant space contact lenses, to fix Hubble's vision. The fix worked. Hubble went on to revolutionize astronomy and deliver some of the most iconic images in space history. Which of these NASA failures shocked you the most? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable real-life moments and untold stories from history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.